This is the NATSEM podcast. Each month, the National Centre for Social and Economic Modelling releases a podcast where we'll explore issues of data and policy with leaders in the field. After listening, send through your questions to natsem@canberra.edu.au so you can have a chance of being a participant in this podcast in the future. I'm Professor Brenton Prosser, Director of the National Centre for Social and Economic Modelling, and I'm glad to welcome Annette Madvig from Nous Group. She's the Director of Public Policy and Evaluation with Nous. And we're going to have a brief chat today around some trends in evaluation and data analytics. So, Annette, thank you for joining us.
Fantastic, Brenton. It's great to be here. Thank you.
I thought I'd start off with a broader question around what do you see as some of the trends in evaluation in recent years? I know you've worked in evaluation within government, the not-for-profits, NGOs, and now with Nous Group for over 20 years. What are some of the trends that you've seen and particularly emerged more recently?
It's a really great question. I think the big shift is about how we think about why we collect information when we collect it and how we use it. So probably traditionally, the idea was that evaluation was a point-in-time process where you might collect information halfway through a multi-year program, and at the end of it, you pull all the data together and put out a report that says this is what happened and this is what worked or what didn't. That process still remains important. There's a process of documenting and being accountable for how a program was delivered. But I think the shift has become much more to say the world is complex and we need to learn as we go. So it's not enough just to come in at 3 years and at 5 years. Actually, we need to learn as we're implementing the program what is happening and why. Are we doing what we thought we'd do? Are we doing it well? And what is starting to change as a result? And that iterative collection of information is important, not only to create a picture of what's happening, but also so that people who are managing and delivering policies and programs can say, well, what are we learning, and therefore what can we do differently? So it's really the notion of supporting adaptive management or adaptive leadership of a policy or program, and that matters when public policy is really directed to some of the most complex issues that we face. And so we really need to learn as we go what is happening in that complexity, update our hypotheses and see what we can do differently.
Some have said that COVID is a little bit of I've used the term crucible, but it's sort of many trends that I think we've seen have been occurring, have been brought to the fore under these sort of unique times. What are some of the demands from evaluation or changes in the sort of requirements from evaluation that you've seen in recent years that have perhaps been intensified by the COVID context?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I don't think we can fully answer that question because what's happening to us and what's happened to us, it's still emerging. We don't fully understand what is happening around us. We're right in the complexity of things moving and shifting. So I think in some ways we'll be able to more definitively answer that question in time. But I guess back to the point I was making earlier, which is we want to learn as we go. So yes, we're in this very strange period of adjustment and adaptation, and we don't know exactly where we're going to end up. But let's assume that we're living in it and we want to try and understand it as we go. And so I think probably there's an intensification of that notion of learning as we go and what we can do with that information. So where evaluation has been heading over the last few years, which is about collecting information, trying to understand it as we go, and which is, you could say, is a developmental approach to evaluation. Additionally, the realist perspective to evaluation, which is let's assume that not everything works for everyone, and therefore let's try to understand what works for whom and in which circumstances and why. I think that notion of having a disaggregated view, of allowing there to be diversity of experience and outcomes, that gets intensified in this period. And we say, what is it that's happening here and how is that changing how we see the world? What are the costs to what have happened? And there are enormous costs, particularly for some groups in our society. But there are also opportunities here. We're also learning new ways of working across policy lines, new ways of working between government, non-government and the private sector. This situation has called in all of our adaptive ability and all of our ability to collaborate and learn from each other. And I think that the opportunity that presents for monitoring and evaluation is to say, how do we intensify that interest in learning as we go? And how can we collect information as we go through it and use that information? And so I think then the question becomes, well, that's a very nice philosophical take on things, but what does it mean practically? And I think there's probably two things. One is it should make us pause and think even harder about who we're collecting information from. So whose voices are we seeking to listen to at this time? And obviously, many of the challenges that we're facing are at national scale and they're emerging really fast. And so we need to have a national view, but there are particular groups of people who have been most affected or for whom there's been a real opportunity in COVID. What can we learn from them? So, for example, I'd really love to learn what has it meant for people who are long-term homeless to have been put into safe and secure shelter for this time. Not only what has it meant to have a safe roof over their heads, but how is it that services have adapted the way they've worked with those people to help address some of the drivers of their homelessness. And there are things that we will be able to learn from that experience that will be relevant to our long-term policy. So that's really about whose voice are we listening to. The second question is, how do we get data at scale? And I think that's where big data is actually quite exciting. There are obviously really important ethical and privacy considerations about how we use big data sets, but there is a lot of data out there, whether it's through economic indicators, ABS statistics, it's also through social media analysis. The opportunity is, how do we use those sources to really tell us in real time what is happening in the context? How is our context changing? So our economic and social context, what does that data tell us about what is going on? And what is happening for different groups of people in community? And how can we use that information to get a handle on what's happening and to rejig our hypotheses about what challenges we need to address through our public policy and programs?
I can just focus in on that last part of your question. I mean, NATSEM with its economic and social modelling, data analysis is very much a key area of interest for us. Given NOUS works closely with government at state, territory and federal levels, I'm interested in any trends you're seeing around demand for data analysis types, or big data, in the evaluation context. What are some of the changing data demands?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think clients really see the value of big data sets, and they want to know that their evaluation partners can deliver very robust analyses of those data sets. So I think NOUS has a really big data analytics practice, and we have created tools to help us understand what is going on in that wider context. So NOUS's COVID-19 Recovery Monitor is an example from that. So there's about using those big public data sets, but also it's about how can we use the secondary data sets that departments and organisations already collect. So for example, if you're looking to understand student learning outcomes for a particular group or from a particular program, how can you use the statewide data set that an education department might collect to contextualise, to get a sense of what's happening more broadly across the student population, and to contextualise the data that you might collect about a particular group. And we want to know that we're using that secondary data in a rigorous way. And I think the other part of it is the communication of the data analysis. So we love producing reports and information that is very visually compelling and engaging, that tells people a story, that shows them visually what is happening across a geographic area or a particular group. And I think clients are aware that that data visualization is really powerful in the way it connects to decision makers and to communities. So what we're seeing amongst clients is a desire for really solid analysis, and then really compelling and powerful visualization of that analysis, and linking the data visualization through to really well considered, careful policy recommendations that take into account the policy drivers and the challenges that are being faced in that particular area or sector.
Often evaluation monitoring, modelling is seen as dry and boring topic, but it's actually a really amazing and exciting time to be working in this space. So thank you very much for your contribution to the NATSEM podcast, and we look forward to questions from our listeners that we can come back to you and dig deeper around some of the nuances and practicalities of what I know we both think is a very exciting area to be involved in. So thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, Brenton. I look forward to engaging with your listeners and answering some of those questions and learning together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the NATSEM podcast. NATSEM is part of the Institute of Governance and Policy Analysis in the Faculty of Business, Government and Law at the University of Canberra. We look forward to speaking again with you next month.